I think it'd be good to open up to the floor. So if there are any questions, I'll take 3 at a time. The gentleman in the green top, and then the gentleman at the back, and
Thanks, Cody. I mean, I agree, David, very much that there is a lot of fat in the public sector to be cut. I'm thinking of armies, therapists, professional do-gooders, children's snoops, some of the Catholic hospitals. I very much doubt that there is a political will to make these kind of cuts, though, and I wonder to what extent the panel think this is more a crisis of political leadership than it is an economic one, really, and what are your solutions to that? Because I very much agree, Linda, that there needs to be restructuring done in the economy. Certain non-profitable sectors should be allowed to go, but we see the opposite happening every time. Germany keeps uphill going, America keeps doom going. Why is there no political will to let there be a proper shakeout, get on and build something new?
Yes, my question actually is addressed to David Smith. Paul mentioned lack of regulation. In actual fact, the change of regulation here in 1997, when the Bank of England regulation of British banks and the branches of foreign banks, here like I say, was a complete and utter disaster because it allowed our banks such as Northern Rock and HBOS to lend extremely recklessly and borrow recklessly. Yet we hear very little about that. In actual fact, it's only just been mentioned by Paul today. For example, the Bank of England regulated British banks for generations. They sorted out 1974 secondary banking crisis. They might have missed bearings, okay, they didn't spot Nick Leeson away in Singapore, but then added to the Singapore authorities, and you could accuse them perhaps of being a little bit sleek when we had the BCCI problem. But generally speaking, we regulated our banks very well. And of course, Canada and Australia, 2 Anglo-Saxon countries, didn't have a real banking crisis. So my question back to David Smith is, why do the press, especially the press with conservative sympathies, keep a deafening silence on this particular point? The fact that the change of regulation in 1997 was a total disaster and contributed very much to the crisis we're in at the moment in this particular country, rather than blaming it all on the Americans.
if you could keep your question quite brief.
Yes, good afternoon. Gordon Brown's denial of various aspects of the economic rundown. When he was chancellor and spent money like water, there must be somebody in the Treasury behind him that could say, hold on, we're doing this wrong, we just cannot keep spending money like this. How come that he can just ride roughshod over maybe some very learned economists? And it's just gone bad to worse, and yet he's changed the economic cycle so many times that, in effect, he's just run roughshod over some people who have got more information about the economy than he has.
So if we could just very brief answers, we've got a little time left. We'll start with David and then David.
Yeah, I mean, just on the FSA and 1997 and all that. I think there are very few subjects that have had more coverage than the failings of the FSA. I mean, it has been well covered, and many people have criticised Gordon Brown for creating the FSA. I mean, you'll remember that in July 2007 we had the best regulatory framework in the world. By September we had the worst. So when the crisis broke, it wasn't very good. And of course, it is conservative policy to effectively abolish the FSA and take regulation back into the Bank of England. Now, I have a different view on this, maybe an unfashionable view, but I think the crisis would have been exactly the same had regulation been within the Bank of England. I think there would be no difference at all. I think the Bank of England has had a very lucky escape not to have the reputation damage of having regulation, because we know for a fact that the FSA was essentially the Bank of England's regulatory division, which moved to a new office. We also know that at the Bank of England, the governor and his senior colleagues didn't really much care about regulation, stability, financial stability.
Eddie George was reported to almost resign on that subject.
The only reason Eddie George was reported to resign, and he did think about resignation, was because of the nature of the announcement, not the actual policy. Because the sequence was, I don't want to take too much time up here. The sequence was that he was told by Gordon Brown the Bank of England was getting independence, control over interest rates, and gained the impression at that meeting that nothing else would change, and went back to the Bank of England and assured everybody that they were keeping regulation. 2 weeks later, he was summoned back and told that in fact, he should have been told that there was another change coming. And he didn't disagree with the decision, as he made clear later.
Well, so there it's got.
And on the other, but anyway, so I think the bank had a lucky escape, and I actually don't think things would have been much different. On your point, just quickly, yes, public spending was too high for too long, but even if he'd stuck to that early prudence, even if we had a budget surplus going into this crisis, we would still be looking at an enormous budget deficit. So if we'd had a budget surplus of 2% of GDP, we'd have had a budget deficit of 9 or 10% of GDP. The swing would have still been enormous because of the vulnerability, particularly of tax revenues, to this particular crisis. But yeah, you're right. Somebody should have restrained that spending more.